Greetings, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Tonight, we'll be reading In Miserable Slavery, Thomas Thistlewood in Jamaica, 1750 until 1786. We're skipping the foreword and his acknowledgments and going straight to the general introduction. Thomas Thistlewood came to Jamaica in 1750. He was 29 years old. He lived here until he died at the end of 1786. He had come, like many others, to try his fortune, but in that he was only moderately successful. His first job of any importance was as penkeeper on the Vineyard Pen, a cattle property in the southwest of the parish of St. Elizabeth. In the latter part of 1751, he left that employment and accepted the overseership of Egypt, a sugar estate west of the town of Savannah de la Mar, in the adjacent parish of Westmoreland. Until 1767, he remained almost constantly a sugar estate overseer, and for most of that time in the employment of William Dorrill, and then his son-in-law, John Cope, whose wife owned properties in that parish. In 1767, he acquired his own property. It was 160 acres, of which more than half was swampland, on which he grew livestock, vegetables, and flowers, and he shot wildfowl. He had also by then become the owner of some 30 slaves, whose labor he sometimes hired out to neighboring sugar planters. He died on that property, which he called Breadnut Island Pen, at the end of November, and was buried in the parish church, Savannah La Mar, on the 1st of December, 1786. Beginning before he came to Jamaica and throughout his life, he made a record of his daily activities, his work, his dealings with other people, including his sex life, and his observations of things and actions which he found interesting. Those diaries, fortunately, have survived. The interest of such documents is beyond question. Here are the daily observations of a man who happened to be intelligent, inquisitive, and reasonably well educated, living and working in Jamaica at the height of its slave sugar prosperity in the 18th century. The value of such documents as reliable sources of information depends on the answers to two questions. First, why did Thistlewood write his diaries? And second, to what extent can we come to general conclusions about Jamaican society on the basis of the evidence provided by a single diarist? Greetings, Forecast. I'm so glad you're here. Thanks for tuning in. Thistlewood does not say why he kept a record. He was well read and without a doubt was familiar with the works of earlier diarists such as John Evelyn. He was a very self-assured young man. And though we get no abrasive rub of conceit in his writing, he clearly must have possessed that degree of egocentricity necessary to support the labor of recording his daily deeds. He was a narcissist. The nature of the diaries themselves suggests that they were intended simply as private, personal aides memoir. Thistlewood tells what, but seldom why. He very seldom reveals the contents of a letter or of a conversation. He simply notes that it happened. He very rarely explains his or anybody else's reason for doing. He merely notes the deed. The record contains very little that can be dubbed explanation or opinion. Most of it is occurrence. There is therefore little reason to think that Thistlewood was writing in order to persuade or to deceive, and we may reasonably accept the account as trustworthy. This is him justifying why he believes that what this man wrote was true. On the point of generalization, the assessment becomes more difficult. There can be little question that Thomas Thistlewood was better educated and more intellectually alive than most of his fellow overseers and bookkeepers. He certainly had no doubt on what score, and the fact of his diaries and their contents support the view of his superior competence and attainment. So not all slavers were these horrible, uneducated, belligerent, ignorant, filthy, dirty bastards. In that sense, he was not one of the crowd. At the same time, his accounts of his own activities and the activities of others display no great disparities of behavior. And it is clear that although there were a few with whom he was not on good terms, he was well liked. In summary, generalizations based on the Thistlewood diaries, if made with care, should be reliable rather than not. The lack of comparative information must weaken our willingness to accept without questions. But on the other hand, it should not be allowed to strengthen disbelief. The diaries contain about 10,000 pages of closely written manuscript. Obviously, I had to be very selective in putting this account together, and the question must therefore arise of my own bias in presentation. I have indeed tended to quote Mr. Thistlewood more heavily in proportion on some matters rather than others. I have, for instance, included more of his references to yaws and venereal infections than to other ailments because their very common and chronic incidence emphasizes the putrescence with which all classes of the slave society were affected. I have quoted heavily from his comments on relationships, sexual and other, between individuals of all social strata, free and enslaved, because I found these relationships more human and therefore far more complicated than our generally stereotyped views have allowed us to observe. I have omitted many instances of the flogging of slaves, but I have reproduced every account of punishments that seem to go beyond even the understood excesses of the time. I have mentioned most instances of births, deaths, and miscarriages among Thistlewood's slaves. I have given emphasis to his account of his and other people's engagements in activities we do not normally associate with the very mercenary West Indian plantation society, such as reading and discussing books, and indulging in a friendly rivalry with the horticulture of exotics. And I have included, I think, every mention made of the Maroons, because of the uniqueness of these brief references by a planter who dealt with them and knew some of them personally. In these and other instances of disproportionate quotation, I have intended to illuminate and have tried to avoid distortion in doing so. There is another way in which I have interfered with Mr. Thistlewood's accounts. I have generally tended to modernize his spelling, and I have increased the number of punctuation marks, which he used very sparingly, again, with the object of clearer presentation. But I have wittingly done nothing to alter the sense of his remarks. There have, however, been difficulties in reading Mr. Thistlewood's handwriting. He normally wrote a clear script, but there were pages on which the paper, the quill, or his own temper at the time failed him. Moreover, some of the original sheets have been slightly torn or discolored, and I have been working from a copy of them. But even with the handwriting at its clearest, there remained some sources of confusion. His vowels were not always clearly made, so it was not always possible to distinguish between words such as come, came, find, and fend, or even fun, unless by an obvious meaning of the sentence. The names and persons and places presented another difficulty. His spelling was inconsistent. For example, Cujo or Cujo, Cuba or Cuba, Morinder or Morinder. And evidence that remains in the present work. The diaries of Thomas Thistlewood hold much more than those pages can possibly display, and hopefully they will attract more and more academic research and interpretation. This account is intended as much for the enjoyment of the curious layman as for the introduction of scholars and students of history to a source of enormous variety and wealth. It offers no explanation or analysis of slavery, or of production, or of Jamaican society. It does, however, tell much about life in Westmoreland as Thistlewood saw it in the second half of the 18th century. In preparing a single volume of limited size, I had to make one general and basic decision. I had to choose between presenting less of Mr. Thistlewood's own account or more of my own remarks on it, or giving space to Mr. Thistlewood and keeping my own verbiage well trimmed. I chose the latter. I have interposed only that explanatory detail and linking commentary which I have judged necessary or found impossible to withhold. In short, I have used whatever understanding I may have of the mid-18th century as a guide to the selection of more material from the diaries rather than as a qualification for the discussion of the less of it. The Jamaica to which Thomas Thistlewood came in 1750 was the most productive of the British slave plantation sugar-producing colonies in the West Indies. Of a total of about 45,775 tons of sugar imported to Britain in that year, just over 20,400 came from Jamaica. The annual average price of Muscovado sugar in London, after a brief decline, increased by nearly 3 cents a counterweight in 1751 to 30 cents and 6, I'm not sure what the D stands for. I want to say dimes. It never again in the mid 18th century fell below 30 cents. Indeed, it intended to move between 35 and 40. Encouraged towards sugar monoculture, land holdings have been increased in size to accommodate that production. A survey in Jamaica in 1670 had shown only 47 proprietors holding estates of 1,000 acres or more. In 1754, there were 467. To support this export-oriented, estate-centered cultivation, a net supply of 177,600 slaves were brought into the island between 1751 and 1775. The net import into other British West Indian colonies combined in the same period was 259,800, meaning over half of them went to Jamaica. The population structure reflected this large importation of African slave labor. By the late 1760s, on rough approximations or estimates made about that time, about 18,000 whites and a much smaller number, perhaps 7,000, free Black and colored people were the possessors of about 170,000 slaves, most of whom were African born. But throughout the period of Thistlewood's sojourn, the numbers of free Blacks and coloreds, originally the offspring of white masters and Black slaves, were growing. As the numbers and the wealth of the class of free Blacks and coloreds increased, the whites' control of the legislature, the whites in control of the legislature, passed laws restricting their right to hold large landed property and to participate in the political and administrative affairs of the colony. Though the largest of the British Caribbean islands, Jamaica is only about 145 miles long, with a maximum width of about 50 miles, containing just over 4,400 square miles, much of which is in high, rugged, mountain, and cockpit country. The areas most suitable for cane cultivation are the larger inland valleys and the alluvial coastal plains and delta and river deltas. One such large area lies in the parish of Westmoreland through the low-lying, extensive Georges Plain and adjacent savannas and the final stretches of the Cabarita River. After its capture from the Spaniards in 1655, English settlement in the island had radiated from the plains of LaGuardia, but movement westward and northeastward had only been restricted by the opposition of the Maroons, who were originally the escaped slaves of the Spaniards. Protracted fighting between British settlers and forces and Maroon guerrilla fighters did not end until 1739, when in mutual exhaustion, the colonists offered and the Maroons accepted overtures of peace. By a treaty signed in that year, the Maroons were assured of their independence on areas of land granted to them. In return, among other clauses, the treaty stipulated that they should keep roads open from their two western townships into the parishes of St. Elizabeth and St. James. that they should, for reward, apprehend and return any slaves run away from their owners. So this was the agreement that these Maroons made. There were other Maroons that were not compromising and did not return enslaved populations. So this was the compromise of certain Maroons in Jamaica. And that they should, if called upon, assist the British and colonial authorities in the suppression of local riot or foreign attack. In the West, the two leaders of the Maroons, both happened to be parties to the treaty, were Colonel Cujo and his brother, Captain Accompong. In 1750, the treaty was only 11 years old, and the whites, still remembering previous danger, regarded the wild Negroes with thinly concealed apprehension. Greetings, Sister Raw, and the elders listening with you. I'm so glad you're here. The forecast says, oh, Thistlewood is that dude that violated all those black women. He enslaved and wrote in his diary. I remember him. Yes, that Thistlewood. The parish of Westmoreland had been established, carved out of St. Elizabeth in 1703, except for Hanover, separated from Westmoreland in 1723, Portland in the Northeast, created in the same year, and Trelawney to be separated from St. James in 1770. Westmoreland was the most recently formed parish in Thistlewood's day. Like other parishes, Westmoreland sent two members elected by freeholders to the colonial assembly. The parochial administrative body was the vestry, which consisted of the custos rotularium, who was the governor's representative and the chief magistrate. As chairman, two local magistrates, the rector, two elected church wardens, and other members to bring the total strength, including the custos, to 10. But this number was frequently exceeded by the inclusion of more magistrates ex officio. The custos of Westmoreland during Thistlewood's time were his neighbor, James Barclay, and after Barclay's death, his employer, John Cope. Both were men of large property, though John Cope was to lose most of his, which had come through marriage through his wife, Mary, maiden name Dorrill. There were more than 40 proprietors owning estates of more than 1,000 acres in the parish in the 1750s. The names of some were Beckford, Storer, Dorrill, Senior, Vassal, Williams, Goodwin, Lewis, Ricketts, Dunbar, Campbell, Blake, Witter, and Woolery. And those names will become increasingly familiar as we follow in the path of Thomas Thistlewood. And so, too, with some of the largely silent majority, the slaves on whose labors the landed proprietors depended, there is no other document known to us by which by daily record over 36 years allows us to find people rather than names among the workforce of the time. So as you can see, he documented everything. And in documenting everything, he wanted it to be known, whether he intended to write his own memoir book or he wanted them to have some record of his existence having happened. We don't know. But we do know that he was well liked and an educated man, more so than the other slaveholders. So let's see what he had to say. Introduction. In this chapter, we meet the remarkably active, inquisitive, and intelligent young Thomas Thistlewood in search of employment and good fortune. And we follow him from London to Egypt, a slave-worked sugar estate in western Jamaica. From his home in Tufome, Lincolnshire, the road to Egypt was long and with two major diversions. First, a voyage of about 2 years in the service of the East India Company, lasting from 1746 until 1748, and then a trading expedition of 2 months in Western Europe. 6 months later, on February 1st, 1750, he boarded ship for the West Indies to try his fortune in the sugar colonies. We shall simply note Thistlewood's travels to Europe and in the Far East. Much more is recorded of his doings in London and in Tufome by way of introduction to him, for we learn something of his character and his interest by his accounts of his activities. We also meet a youngster whom we shall encounter again in Jamaica, his brother's son John, who years later would die by drowning in the Cabarita River in Westmoreland. In the Lincolnshire countryside, where the seats of the landed gentry and their gardeners, several of whom had West Indian connections, Thistlewood's visits to them may have sparked off the idea of going out to Jamaica. On the other hand, it is possible that he visited them because he had already considered such an adventure. Perhaps his uncle, John Longstaff at Stainfield Hall, had something to do with the final decision. Perhaps it was in conversation in the Jamaica Coffee House, one of the best known of those popular London resorts of the time, that the idea had been born. Thistlewood does not say. With him, on a long transatlantic voyage were several others going to Jamaica. But whereas they all seemed to be going to a previously arranged employment opportunity, Thistlewood was traveling with letters of recommendation, great expectations, and self-confidence, but no certainty. The recruitment in Britain of estate overseers and other white employees in the sugar colonies was done largely by family connection, word of mouth, recommendation, and in the case of skilled tradesmen, by indenture. Once in the colony, new arrivals could face competition for supervisory positions from numbers of Creole, which were West Indian-born whites in search of similar employment, and as skilled workers from other Creoles, and indeed from skilled slaves sent out on hire. As in the other West Indian colonies, nearly all the chief towns of Jamaica were on the coastline. This reflected the dependence of European settlers on the arrival and departure of ships, the only means by which their links with their European antecedents could be maintained. In Jamaica, following the nearly total destruction of the notorious pirate city of Port Royal by an earthquake in 1692, Kingston had developed as the chief port and commercial and business center. Although the island's capital and seat of government was at inland Spanish Town, served by wharfs and jetties on the nearby coast. Like Spanish Town, originally called Santiago de la Vega, many places in Jamaica carried and still do carry names reflecting the early Spanish occupation, which was from 1494 until 1655 of the land. Bluefields in the west was originally Orostan, a fortified Spanish settlement, as was Savannah La Mar, the capital of the parish of Westmoreland, where Thistlewood disembarked on Friday, May the 4th, 1750. Unknowingly on his way to Egypt, but still with a diversion or two ahead, his Jamaican employers would soon experience his readiness to confront them if he thought they treated him unfairly or incommensurately with his competence. He would soon experience the devastations of a tropical hurricane, which would, toward the end, wreck his fortune. But now, in the beginning, the road to Egypt. In 1727, Robert Thistlewood, a farmer in the county of Lincolnshire, England, died leaving two sons. John, born in 1716, and Thomas, born in 1721. To the latter he bequeathed 200 pounds sterling. In 1729, the boy Thomas was sent to school in Yorkshire. He boarded with Mr. Robert Calverley, a relative by marriage, and until 1735 attended 3 successive schools where he learned reading, writing, and arithmetic, and began the study of Latin and Greek. In that year, he returned home to Twofold in Lincolnshire and was put to learn agriculture for the next 3 years. In 1738, he went to stay at Hatton in the same county with Mr. John Webster, who taught him mathematics. In the following year, he went to Waddingworth to live with Mr. William Robson, his uncle. He would pay £5 a year for his keep, and he would live on the farm and learn about agriculture. Got on my bed, the ship Portfield. Having come to the end of his semi-formal apprenticeship, Thomas Thistlewood spent a few years buying and selling livestock until, in 1746, having gone to London, he signed on for a voyage to the Far East as purser of supercargo on a ship belonging to the East India Company. Got on my bed, the ship Portfield, Captain Francis D. Abady, 30th of May, 1746, about 4 o'clock in the morning in Ye Thames at Gravesend. The voyage to India and back around the Cape of Good Hope and touching Bahia in Brazil on the return journey ended Saturday, the 27th of August, 1748, when we came to our moorings at Blackwall. On the following day, Thomas Thistlewood disembarked on Friday, September 16th. Received at the India House £24 sterling wages for 24 months, 9 days, my purserage, and 2 months' pay received in my absence, making the sum £30, 7 sterling, 7 cents, and 3D nearly. In addition, we would have been expected to make some profit by trading on his own account. And so he did, for he returned to England laden with various Eastern and Brazilian products. The next couple of days were passed settling his affairs with Captain D'Abadie and the East India Company. All that done, in the afternoon of Friday the 16th, he paid $2 to go into the artillery ground where Long Robin and Wagmark got 27 at cricket against Faulkner, and Harris, who got but 15. Also, having now got his money, he began purchasing clothing. Some fine cloth at 11 cents, $6 a yard, and shoe and knee buckles of silver for 17 pence. Sunday, the 18th, he paid 6D to hear orator Henley in Lincoln's Inn Field, and on Monday, the 19th, he bought a half share in a fighting cock at 5 silver, 3D, and paid 1S to fight it in the Red Lion cockpit. He lost 6S betting on it. He consoled himself for the next few days by buying more cloth, buckles, and a penny worth of oysters. Thursday, the 22nd, was at Mr. Hewitt's, gave him some Brazil tobacco, and to Mr. Hewitt some Persian dates and a half-pound of Brazilian snuff. The Hewitts, who lived near Kingston, were close friends, and when later Thistlewood was in Jamaica, Mr. Hewitt was to be his chief correspondent and agent in London. On Friday and Saturday, there were more purchases: a cut wig, 2 pairs of worsted stockings, and a ticket for to see acted at Drury Lane Playhouse, Hamlet, and an entertainment called Anatomics, the part of Ophelia by Miss Clive. Early in the next week, he walked with friends in the countryside, stopping at pubs to quench their thirst. He bought, for reading, Hamilton's account of East India. He went to Covent Garden Playhouse to see The Beggar's Opera, with part of the Macheath played by Mr. Lowe, and he noted Sturgeon Spawn, a great provocative. And then on Wednesday the 28th, in the evening, to Mueller, spent 2S 6D in Drury Lane, written as DL. This was his matter of recording sexual intercourse. He used the Latin word mulier to indicate a prostitute. The G above her title marked her as the 7th woman in alphabetical notation with whom he had indulged, but we have no evidence to show when, where or when he had enjoyed the previous A through F. On the morning of Thursday, October 6, 1748, Thistlewood set off by stagecoach from the Three Cups Inn in London to Lincolnshire. The route lay through Hatfield, Stevenage, Biggleswade, and Huntington, Stilton, Stamford, Grantham, and Ancaster, into the city of Lincoln below the hill. Thence, on Sunday the 9th, to Short Ferry by the river, Witham. Then, he says, met my brother and his son John at Greatwell and got to Tufon about noon. Thomas Thistlewood had come home. He remained there until April the 2nd, 1749, which was a Sunday. Tuesday, October 18th, 1748, the woods and hedges as yet are all green, but today is a cold, stormy day. Gave my sister Nanny 2 handkerchiefs and some muslin, a fan, shells, and other things, and Dryden's State of Innocence. Tuesday, October 26th, 1748, come in ibi in Nostrodomo Adam Noctem. E.B. was probably Easter Boston, who seems to have worked for his brother. There were 3 women whose company he obviously enjoyed while in Lincolnshire. He was crude in his description as well. The closest was Brett Mitchell, who lived with her parents at Folsby, but was apparently staying in Thomas Toyne's house. Thomas Toyne, married on 20th January 1749, had left Thistlewood to fodder and care for his cattle. Soon after their return, Brett would return to Folsby. Thursday, 2nd of March, 1749, sat up till almost morning with Brett Mitchell at Thomas Toyne's. She's going away. Saturday, 4th of March, 1749, sat up at Thomas Toyne's with Brett Mitchell part of the night. Gave her a Kazimbar Bazaar silk handkerchief. Sunday, 5th of March, lent to Thomas Toyne a guinea, come in B.M., which is probably Brett Mitchell, in Thomas Toyne's T.T. house, Domo Apud Noctem. Tup. Thomas Toyne gave me a pair of white gloves for looking after his cattle when he was married. Gave Brett Mitchell a cornelian stone and a toothpick case with a spring. She gave me an ivory fish. I gave Mrs. Toyne some farina de pan or cassava flour. I sat up with Brett Mitchell most of the night. March 6th, about noon, accompanied Brett towards Bucknell. She's going home, and took my leave of her in the bottom of the southeast corner of Mr. Fowler's moor and the old house. Tuesday, March the 7th, 1749, went in the forenoon to Stainfield Hall to see my uncle John Longstaff. Walked in the park, and with Miss Ellison, who has brought Sir John's timber and Mr. Blades, his steward, stayed all night at Stainfield Hall. Friday the 10th, bedtimes in the morning, I went to Gandaby Hall, and Mr. Tagg and I, accompanied by Mr. Norfolk, walked to Carr Breckenberg, Esquires, at Pandon to see Mr. Thomas Harrison Butler and Mr. Treadaway Butler, gardeners. We went through Haddon Churchyard. We were greatly made of the Pandon Hall. I was over the gardens, groves, etc. Saw Henry Fielding maybe, the novelist who lived from 1701 to 1754. That was a question inserted by the author because he wasn't sure whether or not Harry Fielding was Henry Fielding the novelist, who was alive during that time. Wednesday, 22nd of March, 1749, in the evening, took a walk into William Robson's Turnhalls, went 3 running leaps, 20 hops, etc., with John Robson. A few days later, Thistlewood went to Folsby. On Monday, 27th, to Mr. George Mitchell's to see his daughter, Brett Mitchell. I got there about 6 o'clock p.m. or before. I asked her father and mother leave to sit a while with her. It turned out that he spent the night at the Mitchells and left between 3 and 4 o'clock the next afternoon. Thistlewood gives no explanation of his visit and no indication of what passed between himself and Brett Mitchell or her parents. He recorded only that he was entertained with great civility. It is a guess that he went to propose marriage and was politely rejected by her parents. The other 2 ladies of interest were Jenny Cook, whose husband was at sea, and Mrs. Thomas Toyne, the former Elizabeth Brown. For the time being, and perhaps because of his very close involvement with Brett Mitchell, those relationships were no more than friendly. And as a final example of his twofold activities, there was Thistlewood's constant predilection for recording information which amused or interested him. Tuesday, 24th of January, 1749, 2 dips of bitter apples steeped in beer and took at twice. It is said will cause abortion, certainly. J. Cook. Thursday, 23rd of February, 1749. For a simple clap, take every other day a dose of any purging pills and continue that course, if your strength will allow it, until the running change both its color and consistence and appears the very same as semen. After that, to stop the gleep, take every day in the morning 20 or 30 drops of balm capive dropped on a piece of loaf sugar, and if it does not stop the gleep, with taking physic twice a week, take the Sydenham's common purging draught twice a week. At the beginning of April 1749, Thomas Thistlewood prepared for a return to London. He distributed farewell gifts to his and said goodbye to his friends. He received £3 9 in full of all accounts from Thomas Toyne, enjoyed a farewell breakfast at his brother's house, gave Easter Boston a final 2 cents, $3, and about 1 o'clock set out from Twofold. He arrived in London on the 5th of April. There were signs that Thistlewood was not entirely at ease. He was, and had for some time, been unemployed. He was occasionally dependent upon loans from his landlady, Miss Gresham. He seems to have written to his brother asking for a sum that would enable him to take some of his goods out of the king's warehouse and to engage in trade. Also, he bemoaned his lack of company of a good woman. Do you think Thistlewood was a bit of a nympho? Do you think he was sexually preoccupied? On Monday, May the 1st of 1749, Thistlewood took a walk in the long fields, borrowed off Miss Gresham 5 pence. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 28. Which my soul which yet my soul seeketh, but I find not. A man, one man among 1,000 have I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. He wanted a woman bad. 2 days later, he received a letter from his brother dated the 1st of May and containing an order to receive 60 pounds. He proceeded to take his mocha coffee from the customs house. He took over from Mr. Alexis Emerson, an acquaintance in the trade, 34 fish skin razor cases full and complete at 16 pence. He acquired sundry other items, and he began to prepare for a trading voyage into Western Europe. On the 17th of May, he booked his passage to Middelburg in the Netherlands and arrived there on June 1st. During June and July, he visited Ghent, Antwerp, Brussels, Bruges, Ostend, Dunkirk, and Calais. He went sightseeing, recorded a variety of observations on agriculture, architecture, social behavior, church music, and the trading fair at Antwerp, which fell below his expectations. At Bruges, he arranged to send some of his goods to the Frankfurt Fair and to receive in return wares from Dresden. At the beginning of July, he set out from Calais and was landed at Dover in the evening of the 3rd of August. The next day, he was on the coach to London, passing through Canterbury, Sittingbourne, Chatham, Rochester, Gravesend, and Dartford. He arrived in London at about 7 p.m. on Sunday the 6th. Just outside of London, on the road, he had approached a poor but honest Mueller prostitute. Later he found what he was looking for, cum Mueller, L, an alley west of Fleet Market Street. Spent 1 cent, spent 8 dimes. On Monday, 2nd of October, Thistlewood visited, as often as he did, the Royal Exchange and then the Bank Coffee House, where he drank his coffee for 20 cents. Then, for the first time, as far as he notes to inform us, he went to the Jamaica Coffee House and sat there drinking coffee. There is no clear indication of when or why he began to consider trying his fortunes in Jamaica. But it would seem that the decision had been made before he went to the Jamaica Coffee House, for 3 days later he set off for Tufome to pay farewell to his family and to collect letters of recommendation. His acquaintance with so many of the gardeners, wardens, gamekeepers, and other employees of the landed gentry, and his own apparently engaging personality and obvious intelligence put him in good stead with those who had connections with the West India plantocracy. And it is not impossible that the idea had been born during his visits in the Lincolnshire countryside earlier in that year. Indeed, as we shall see, Mr. Robert Viner, Esquire, of Ganby, and the conduit of Conduit Street near Hanover Square, London, seems to have had something to do with it. Thistlewood arrived at Tufome at dusk on Sunday the 8th. So as you can see, he had a connection He had finally found somebody that would speak up on his behalf, this Robert Viner. Monday the 9th, in that afternoon, I waited upon Mr. Viner at Ganby to return him thanks for his letters. He was well pleased. From there, I went to Ragby to wait upon Mr. Colgrave, who received me well. He is ill of the gout. Mr. Colgrave had been in Jamaica and had connections there. On Thursday the 19th, Thistlewood set off to Ragby to see Mr. Colgraves again, but he was out, and they met the next day at Mr. Parnell's grounds in Pandon. Thistlewood was suitably impressed, saying, "Mr. Colgrave is not yet 35, but is an excellent orator and of sound judgment, a very clever man." So Thistlewood was giving this man praise. Colgrave promised to send him letters from workshop in Nottingham where he lives. About 3 weeks later, he received, as he had been promised, a letter of recommendation from Mr. Viner at Ganby to a gentleman of great interest in Jamaica, namely William Beckford, Esquire. Business had been attended to before pleasure. Having received Mr. Colgrave's promise of letters of recommendation of the 20th October, Thistlewood felt free to engage in other matters. On the 21st, he began a torrid affair with Elizabeth Toyne. In that evening, called at Mr. Toyne's. Come, Mrs. Toyne. He was a scoundrel. In the parlor, after supper, there was a lecture. Stayed all night. Lay with her and Jenny Cook. Come, Mrs. Toyne, in the night. 4 tempora in ditto parlor. Supped a lecture. Where Mrs. Toyne was where Mr. Toyne was at the time remains a mystery. From then on until he left Tufome in mid-November, Thistlewood visited Miss Toyne almost daily at noon or at nights. It was not that Thomas Toyne was away from home. Friday, 27th, in the afternoon, went to see Thomas Toyne dress out a pond in the hill close. Expected fish, but there was none. I went from thence to Waddingwood, played cards, won, stayed all night at William Robson's. The next day at noon, he was with Mrs. Toyne, and so until November 1st, when they shared the height of their abandon. In the evening was Mr. Toyne, Thomas Toyne's. In the evening was at Mr. Thomas Toyne's. Stayed all night. Lay in the parlor bed. Come E.T. and the man's wife. Come illa in nocte quine q tempora. Having received the letter of introduction from Robert Viner to William Beckford, Thistlewood made ready to depart from Tufome. On that day, the 10th of November, he visited Mrs. Toyne at midday for the last time. He spent the evening with them all and gave Mrs. Toyne and Jenny Cook each some myrrh and frankincense. That was an expensive gift at that time. That was like a royal gift because they believed in the myth of the birth of Jesus and the divinity of Christ. And this was a high value gift to give someone, frankincense and myrrh. And he had been sleeping with this married woman under his friend's nose the whole time. He had had business dealings with this man. How despicable was he? In the morning was at Thomas Toyne's. Come Jane Cook, sublet in the chambers in Aurora. And so to London to prepare. This man was a trip. He was sleeping with this married woman the whole time. There, in the week beginning November 19th, he bought maps of Jamaica and took his letter of introduction from Mr. Venner to the Grosvenor to Little Grosvenor Street and Brook Street near Grosvenor Square to inquire for Mr. Beckford, Esquire, Member of Parliament for Shaftesbury at Dorsetshire, but was informed he is now in Jamaica. He acknowledged letters of introduction received from Peter Colgrave and collected another from Mr. Scott, a gardener at Turnham Green. He resumed his walking with Patty Hatcher, a young friend with whom, extraordinarily, he had a platonic relationship, and his excursions into the lanes and fields in search of a prostitute. By the night of the 31st of January, immediately preceding his departure, he had exhausted his first round of the alphabet. In the evening, come Mueller, prostitute, AA. Up an alley to the west of the Fleet Mart in a chamber, spent $3. That month had been spent very largely equipping himself for the adventure, making arrangements with Mr. Hewitt at Brompton to look after merchandise still in Europe, collecting recipes and cures for illnesses that he might encounter, and in between visits to the Jamaica Coffee House, where he eventually arranged his passage, buying more cloth and refusing an offer to go back and trade in Flanders, he remembered to leave his measurements with Peter Greenough, his friend Ann Taylor. Thistlewood was something of a dandy in his dress, and he did not propose to go to seed in the plantations. So he wanted to go there to be a gentleman. You know, there's always this backstory of the people that want to go and plant crops and be a planter. They want the exclusivity of the planter life. They want to be the ones that have the slaves waiting on them hand and foot. They're not going to be a part of the planter life so that they can work the field. That's not at all in their imagination. At 5 o'clock on the morning of Thursday, February 1st, 1750, Thistlewood set out for Jamaica. He writes, set out for the Graves in the Gravesend tilt boat. Got there about 9:30. For myself and hammock, boating aboard the Flamborough, £6. Found my case broke open, my Iraq Brazil rum and Lisbon wine gone. The looking glass Miss Gresham gave me broke. Note we are moored. Ready money, 4 guineas, 1/2 ditto, 3 shillings, 6 pence, and 5 quid of halfpence. Total £14, 18 shillings, and five quid. The Flamborough is said to be a prime sailor. At night, Captain Bonnell came on board. The following morning brought an interesting event. These were days in which people were still being kidnapped on the streets of port towns in England and hustled on board vessels bound for plantation colonies where they would be sold into indentured servitude. So as they were kidnapping Africans, they were doing the same thing to their own people. But the difference is that their own people had the opportunity to integrate into whiteness because they were white people. You see? Shipping off their undesirable whites to the colonies as well. So when they say things like, we didn't get the cream of the crop, we didn't get the best of the best, we got their worst, we got their worst, we got their cast offs, we got their rejects. So in that, if Thistlewood was an educated man, he was not the common indentured servant. He was not the common overseer because he had a little bit more education than that. Are you guys okay? Let me know. Drop a 1 in the chat if you want me to keep going, or we can slow it down and stop for the night. I'm going to give you guys a moment to think about it. Because because Thistlewood definitely had his hangups, and the reality of the thing is that he was a narcissist. He is what we would have called a sexually depraved, sex addict narcissist. All right, you guys are good. We're going to keep going. For the next 2 days, the Flamborough remained at anchor, and then rolling through rolling seas made a sickening start, especially for the 6 young women on board. They were among those going into service on the plantations, and except for 1 or 2, had been taken into the company of the captain or one of the other gentlemen passengers on the quarter deck. They were like, they were there, they were like Thistlewood accommodated below. On the evening of Friday, the 2nd of March, they passed the Isle of Wight. Gradually, the weather improved. The Flying Flamborough had fallen from prouder days. She had been the Flamborough of Her Majesty's frigades of 20 guns, but now was a merchant vessel with 350 tons of burthen. 116 feet from stem to stern and 28 feet in the beam, she was to protest against bad handling on the voyage. She was bound for Antigua and Kingston, Old Harbor, Black River, and Savannah Lamar in Jamaica. Among the passengers, there were 6 unnamed girls about whom Thistlewood had little to say except when they were in trouble. This happened on a couple of occasions, the most notable thing being when the young Yorkshire girl was found to have stolen some butter and some of Miss Jones' clothes. Miss Jones was the captain's companion and the cause of much strife, especially between a merchant, Mr. Dupree, and the captain. Mr. Dupree was not one of Thistlewood's companions at sea. Perhaps one of the reasons for his recurring disputes with the captain was his rather lonely, intermediate social position amongst the passengers. As a merchant, he would not have considered Thistlewood and the majority of the others as social equals. As a merchant, he would not have been accepted as an equal by the few gentlemen passengers with whom Thistlewood made reference on arrival at Antigua. In the afternoon, when the gentlemen went ashore, I also went in the barge. One of these gentlemen is a clergyman, one a ship captain, the other a very old gentleman who is chief owner of the island of Barbuda. Interesting. So they had all of these men at higher stations in life, and Thistlewood had no chance of making any inroads with the young ladies that were on board because women usually are hypergamous, meaning they want to date the man with the higher station than them. So you got a captain, a clergyman, you got a man that owns an island. There's no way he had a chance. He does not even mention their names and probably did not know them, although he had noted during the voyage the presence of a Captain Spellman. There is no knowing who the clergyman might have been, or if there were other unacknowledged gentlemen on board. But of one thing there is no doubt. The very old gentleman, who is chief owner of the island of Barbuda, as Thistlewood describes him, was Christopher Codrington, to whose family that island had been leased in 1685 by King Charles II. Thomas Ashland and Thomas Bottomley were Thistlewood's messmates. Ashland was going to Mr. Joseph Weatherby, overseer to Mr. Breckford at Old Harbor, Jamaica. Bottomley was going to be at Mr. Long's in Clarendon, Jamaica. Mr. Elena Edwards was Thistlewood's companion ashore in St. Johnstown, Antigua, saying, Mr. Edwards and I walked about the town to see it. St. Johnstown was the name of the town. Here is a pretty piece of modern architecture, not yet finished, built of their own stone, which they are vastly proud of. It is for a sort of state house, and they may serve to have assemblies in it. Spent in the great tavern or punch house, which is sort of change, in punch 6 Ds, which here is 9, 8 for yams, and 56 limes for 6 pence. Many wood houses, some of a kind of brick or stone, some glass windows, but an indifferent sort of place. Streets rugged and stony, and everything dear. Saw in the Negro market some yams, limes, cashew apples, guinea corn, plantains, and a few other things. Some black girls laid hold of us and would gladly have had us gone in with them. Dated the 13th of April, 1750. Mr. Burgess, who came from Glastonbury in Somerset, was going to his brother Thomas in Anado Bay, Jamaica. Sadly, on arrival in Kingston, he had news that his brother had died. Mr. Fowler, who was with Burgess, had one evening had one supper with Thistlewood on board the Flying Flameborough, was going to Mr. Fuller's at Spanish Town. Fowler and Burgess, it appears, had joined company on board before they came to know Thistlewood. The three and another, a Mr. Lightenhouse, became friends and went ashore together in Kingston. It had been a long, troublesome voyage. There had been times of games and merriment, but there had also been fights and quarrels and expressed dissatisfaction in the matter of performance of the captain and chief mate. It was with some relief, therefore, that those Jamaica-bound watched the ships approach to Morant Bay on the southeast coast. There, at 4 p.m. on Monday, 23rd of April, a Negro pilot came on board us. At 7 p.m., they were at Port Royal. On the 24th, at about noon, they came alongside in Kingston, and with his friends ashore, where they got lost. At about 8 p.m., they turned up at a guest house, Mrs. Davenport in Temple Lane, and there they lodged. In the evening of Friday the 27th, probably in the company of Mr. Fowler and Mr. Burgess, who on that day received news of his brother's death, he walked to Captain Cornish's about 1.5 miles to the eastward by the seaside. He says he is 81 years old. He has mostly drank water alone his 37 years and a great deal of chocolate. He is fresh and nimble, walked out in the country with me, keeps a genteel mulatto girl, though some say she is from white parents of both sides, which I can scarce believe. 2 days later, in the evening, Mr. Fowler and I walked to Spring Path to the westward of the town to see Negro diversions, odd music, motions, all sorts of things, the Negroes of each nation by themselves. The next day, after breakfast at the White Cross, Thistlewood and Fowler walked to the Wherry Wharf, from whence the latter set out for Spanish Town and Thistlewood boated to Port Royal. Port Royal, he was to decide, had somewhat a grander look in the streets of Kingston, where much old glass and old iron about the streets. Although the Flying Flameborough was bound for southern ports, on the way to Savannah Lamar, Thistlewood did not rejoin her. Perhaps because of previous unpleasantness, perhaps also because the desertion of some of her crew had delayed her departure. Indeed, some of them had, like Thistlewood, decided to go to Savannah Lamar by a different vessel. About sunrise, went aboard the John and James, which was an open boat, James Rogers, commander, for Savannah Lamar. We were standing out when the Queensboro boat came on board. The Queensboro was one of several English warships then in the Rocksteed. Took out the McGrath, Alexander Burt, William Denny, and another man who was concealed. Took them on board perforce. Note, they fired 2 guns to alarm the shipping and port not to let us pass, although Captain Rogers had already cleared out. On Thursday, 3rd of May, Just as the morning gun was fired, Captain Rogers weighed anchor and, having once again been searched, began the 30 leagues to Savannah Lamar. After a stop at Bluefields at about 1 o'clock in the morning, they arrived at Savannah Lamar at noon on Friday, the 4th of May, 1750. Went ashore, took my things with me, put them in McHogan's storehouse. To Captain Rogers for passage, a pound currency, 32 bits. For dinner, 4 bits. Spent 2 ditto. Shaving, 1 ditto. Walked to William Durrill's Esquire. Gave him Mr. Colgrave's letter. Was well received. The next day, Mr. Durrill lent him a horse and rode him to Mr. Storer's. Gave him Mr. Colgrave's letter. Was well received. Dined with him. He offered me to go to his plantation next week and stay there, ready to succeed his overseer, who leaves him in about 2 months. Mr. Thistlewood had now met the Jamaican plantocracy. The brothers, William and Thomas Durrill, were landowners and merchants. Thomas Durrill lived in Savannah Lamar. William Durrill, with whom Thistlewood was directly concerned, was the owner of Salt River, Bowens, renamed Paradise, and Egypt estates. The two first named lying east of the river of the town and the other west. William Durrill lived at Salt River. Mr. Durrill's house is pleasantly situated about 1/4 of a mile from the sea and about 2½ or 3 miles from Savannah Lamar to the eastward, faced with wood, backed with stone, or more properly lined, has portholes for defense, wood columns on each side, near Salt River, dated 11th of May, 1750. So as you can see, he was quite envious of the house. He admired it quite a bit. With him lived his daughter Mary, nicknamed Molly, then about 14 years old, who was later to marry John Cope of Strathbogie. Also permanently resident in the Salt River house was Miss Elizabeth Anderson, whose relationship with the Durrills was not explicitly stated by Thistlewood. She was, in fact, Elizabeth Anderson of the parish of Westmoreland, aforesaid single woman, and the mother of William Durrill's natural son, Thomas, commonly called Thomas Durrill, and his natural daughter Mary, commonly called Mary Durrill, begotten by me on the body of the said Elizabeth Anderson. Nonetheless, as the clauses of his last will and testament to be made in 1754 would also indicate, Mr. Durrill seems to have been a little unsure of his exclusive enjoyment of her favors. Even before his death, Thistlewood indicated that Mrs. Anderson was entertaining Mr. Forrester, the Salt River overseer, and shortly after Mr. Durrill died, she married William Billy Mould, his store clerk. Though Thistlewood nowhere describes her, it would seem that Miss Anderson was a free colored woman, for she subsequently bore a daughter whom Mould said was a mulatto. By Wednesday, 9th of June, Thistlewood had let Mr. Storer know if the offer made to him on his arrival was acceptable. He had decided that it was not. He had better views, which prevented me. On Sunday, the 20th of May, he sat down for the first time his better views about possible employment. Often over here, gentlemen whom Mr. Durrell mentions my intent to be a surveyor to, say that it will be a very good thing for me if I understand but enough figures for it, which gives me great hopes. It was not a completely new interest. He had learned some mathematics in school and in London shortly before embarking for the West Indies. He had purchased The Practical Surveyor by Samuel Weil, and Monday, the 21st, he stayed at home at Salt River writing letters, which he was able to send off by William, Captain Glendenning's, one of Durrell's vessels, addressed to his brother in Twofold, Mr. Hewitt and Mr. Colgrave. His news must have been optimistic. He was now employed, but this was to be only briefly. He would later be called upon from time to time to put his surveying skills to use. But now, following the death by drowning of Mr. Crawford, his associate assistant surveyor, and the differences of opinion with Mr. Wallace, the surveyor, he gave up. He had, however, noted one memorable meeting during his travels on Thursday, the 29th of May, on the road to St. James, saying, between 8 and 9 miles from Dean's Valley, met Colonel Cujo and one of his wives, one of his sons, a lieutenant, and other attendants. He shook me by the hand and begged of a dram of us, which we gave him. He had on a feathered hat, a sword by his side, gun upon his shoulder, barefoot and bare-legged, somewhat a majestic look. He brought to my memory the picture of Robinson Crusoe, dated June 1st, 1750. And disappointingly for us, not a word more about the meeting with the Maroon leader. Soon after, Crawford and Thistlewood reached the great river, about 1.5 miles from the Dean's Valley, 30 to 40 yards wide, inviting cool water, and I bathed in it. That afternoon, they arrived at the soldiers' barracks where they dined, and Thistlewood, happy and energetic, leapt up to catch swallows, but apparently without success. By nightfall, the survey was over, and they were back at their hut in the Plantain Walk, where eat some cuckling hen broth and hot pot and pepper pot, and also tum-tum of plantain, and fish beat together with old Sharper, who is a sensible Negro. His brief employment as a surveyor was followed by a period of idleness. Then, on the 29th of June, Thistlewood made up his mind. In the morning, rode to Sweet River Plantation and agreed with Florentius Vassall, Esquire, to be his penkeeper at £50 per annum. For that sum, a weekly allowance of 2 bottles of rum and 2 pounds of sugar, and a quarterly allowance of a barrel of beef, He was to supervise the pen and provide Mr. Vassall with regular accounts of his stewardship. Obviously, Vassall made the offer before. On Sunday, 1st of July, Thistlewood rode past Strathbogie Castle to Mr. Vassall, who was at his other Westmoreland estate, called Friendship. There he received 2 pistols to cover his expenses on the journey to Vassall's St. Elizabeth's property, vineyard pen, an order to the Sweet River overseer, Mr. Walker, to provide a mule, and the boy Sampson as Thistlewood's guide, and letters confirming his appointment. Thus armed, and having bid his farewells at Salt River and Savannah Lamar, he stored his belongings once more, this time with Mr. Bowen at Mr. Durrell's Barcadier store. Having divided 5 shillings among the domestic slaves at Durrell's house, Thomas Thistlewood set out for the vineyard. He had not 1 farthing of money left, but what is laid by. He carefully noted the values of coins. 1 rial or real or bit was 7.5 ditto, Jamaica currency. 10 rials made $1, sometimes called cob. The equivalent of 6 shillings and 3 dittos, 38 rials or reals, equal 1 pistole, which was £1 sterling, 3 shillings and 9 dittos. 62 reals made 1 modere, which was £1 sterling, 18 shillings and 9 dittos currency. And 140 pounds currency was the equivalent of 100 pounds sterling. The vineyard pen was a property of about 1,170 acres in southwest Elizabeth, in the plains between burnt Savannah Mountain and the sea. This pen and some small part of the land adjoining it is accounted very hot. The reason may be the abundance of flat rock reflex, the heat of the sun very strong. The burnt Savannah Mountain stretches along from northeast to southeast, probably keeps off the winds very much to the eastward, and the mountain is very high. Dated July 3rd, 1751. Thistlewood was Epstein before Epstein. He absolutely was. And he looked at everything. Thistlewood looked at everything through the eyes of what would be his benefit. How would it be of benefit to him? Everything was looked at that way, whether it was land or opportunity or people or enslaved people or property or anything he looked at it, he looked at for how it would best benefit him, how would it suit his desires. To a man coming from Westmoreland, the change of climate was remarkable, the more so because the vineyard area in particular had been suffering a prolonged drought since December of 1749. Although we have had some abundance of rain in Westmoreland before I left it, and now we have vast falls daily within 3 or 4 miles of us, yet we can get none, has been excessively dry many months, vegetables all scorched up. Dated July 11th, 1750. Indeed, as we shall see, much of Thistlewood's concern during his first weeks of management was providing foodstuffs for the slaves and feed for the animals. Of the pen's more than 1,000 acres, much was in swamp. Of the balance, most was in common pasture, but the fattening pasture of about 23 acres was planted in guinea grass and Scotch grass. The pastures were enclosed by railed wooded fences, or palisados, as they were called, with prickly penguin planted alongside. Protected in this way from the livestock were the provision grounds of the slaves and of the pen itself. The pen carried a variety of livestock, large and small, cattle, horses, mules, asses, sheep, goats, pigs, ducks, turkeys, and fowls. It produced timber, mostly mahogany, and dye wood, which is called logwood. In the estate's garden and grounds, and in the slaves' provision grounds, there were a variety of trees and vegetable crops. Income accrued from the sale of livestock, mainly cattle, mahogany, and logwood chips, but probably because of the unkind climate, it was not a very profitable enterprise. The costs of management were small. Thistlewood was the only supervisory white, and he was a quick learner and efficient. But the maintenance of the tools and equipment of the property and the cost of feeding the slaves and the livestock in time of drought were obviously burdensome. Vineyard was surrounded by sugar estates, and the vineyard cattle were often tempted. The buildings on the vineyard were, it seems, adequate and unpretentious. The great house, as one would expect, provided the most spacious accommodation, but it was not a structure in the grand manner. In 1751, Thistlewood had two hands employed making mortar to repair the walls, and they followed common custom. When mud walls are sufficiently dry and very much cracked in this country, they mix water, soft cow dung, and wood ashes with a small quantity of fire mold till it be pretty thick, so as scarce to run out of hand. With this, they rub the walls once or twice over, and it will fill and cover all the cracks. It dated June 9th, 1751. It sounds like he was fascinated by that prospect, the idea that they knew how to solve their own problems. The house he lived in was modest indeed. It was walled by wattles plastered as described below, and roofed with thatch, in which from time to time he found interesting inhabitants. The overall outer dimensions were 28 feet by 15 feet, divided across into 3 rooms. The two at the end being equal size, 8.5 feet by 15.25 feet, and the largest in the center, 11 feet. This central room had 4 doors, 2 connecting with the other rooms and 2 others facing and leading out of the house on each long side. Near to the great house lay the garden and a new private pasture brought into use during Thistlewood's time. In the garden, there were about a half dozen sweet and a number of Seville or sour orange trees. There was also a grape arbor and a variety of other fruit trees, shrubs, and flowers in which Thistlewood took great interest. Apart from his own horticultural inclinations, He was intrigued by the variety of tropical flora and fauna, and, as we shall see, by his frequent parenthetic, as is done in this country. He was constantly comparing his knowledge of England and other places he had visited. Through the pastures and by pathways, through the morass, a way led to the vineyard barcadier or jetty. Every estate that had access to a waterway had its barcadier, however small, where supplies to and from the property might be located on canoes or larger craft to save heavy carriage on the rutted roadways. And since the barcadier led by the morass, and Thistlewood was both alligator hunter and amateur naturalist, he went there more often than business demanded. So he was fixated with going down to this alligator place and looking at nature. Went to the barricadier this afternoon, got some wild cinnamon bark from a tree about as thick as my leg, one just about 7 or 8 inches square, very thick blossoms, purplish close-shaped flower, smells like crow's foot in our meadows in England, dated June 1st, 1751. Lacovia, then the parish capital, was the center at which the quarterly returns of slaves and livestock population had to be made for the purposes of taxation. Thistlewood went 3 times, in October of 1750, in January of 1751, and in April of 1751. On the second occasion, which was the 8th of January, 1751, he gave in 1 white, 39 Negroes, 232 cattle, and recorded, "Today, first saw a white person since December 19th that I was at Black River." And upon his unusual non-committal style, but with great detail, Captain Accompong here, about my size, in a ruffled shirt, blue broadcloth coat, scarlet cuff to his sleeves, gold buttons, and he had with that white cap and black hat white linen breeches puffed at the rims, no stockings or shoes on, many of his wives and his son there. Thomas Thistlewood worked on the vineyard pen between Lacovia and Black River for almost exactly 1 year until he quarreled with Mr. Vassall and left of his own accord. During that time, as the only white employee on the property, he mixed much with the slaves and was introduced by them to the local fauna and flora. They was telling him all the secrets. There were only about 40 slaves on Vineyard, 24 males and 18 females upon his arrival. Of the latter, Thibba, the chief domestic servant, introduced him to Jamaican fruit, foodstuffs, and local culinary practice. Marina, a field slave, became his first wife and lived with him, occasionally protesting his sexual pursuit of many other of the women. On leaving Vineyard, he had a cottage built for her and entrusted her to care for Julius, whom he seems to have been regarded as the most responsible of the Vineyard men. So Thibba, who actually is with him when he dies, appears here as a domestic, and she wasn't even his quote-unquote first wife. Marina was his first wife, was the first Black woman he gave any attention and resource to. And even though he had these two women that he was going in between, he couldn't stop chasing around the other Black women that were on the plantation and uh, taking his liberty with them and violating them. 23rd of June, 1751, put up my hanging bookshelf in Marina's parlor for a bed for her, fitted it up with a mat which I brought from Caesar. On Saturday, July 6th, at night, gave Marina some sugar, 4 bottles of rum, some beef and pepper pot, with 18 pints of corn to make made into fungi to treat the Negroes and especially her shipmates withal at her housewarming. They was very merry all night. Mr. Marksman, Caesar sang and drummed. Guy and Charles, Fibba and Wanneker danced Congo and the like. Some top performances we had. Marina herself got very drunk, as well as many others. I sat up good part of the night seeing their tricks. Charles ate fire, struck his naked arm many times with the edge of a bill very hard, yet received no harm. So he was ubiquitously fascinated by the culture of these people who could eat fire and could strike their arms naked many times with the edge of a bill and not be harmed. And he wanted to conquer these women and have these women for his own possession. Then on Sunday the 7th, his last day at the vineyard, spoke to Julius about Marina. He assented to speak, and for Marina more gifts, some thread, old caps, 2 old handkerchiefs, a white shirt, 2 pairs of old trousers, a long cuttican, a basket, a cassava roaster, wild cinnamon, wax light, a bench, a little stool, a cupboard which he hung for her, and a chest to put her chattels in, which also he put in her house. A barrel for corn, a barrel for beef brine with a piece of beef potatoes, 3 bottles of rum, sugar, butter, etc. As to the little pot I had in my house, I left it with the girl who lived with me, else she has nothing to boil her victuals in. Then pro temp a notte sute sublectum cum Marina, and in the morning. So he slept with Marina after giving her all those gifts, but at least I guess Marina got something out of it. Got up by noonrise, gave Marina a bottle of rum, water pail, and took leave of her in my parlor. Almost exactly 1 year later, they would meet again, briefly, in Westmoreland, from the vineyard through Black River and along the coast for most of the way, the road to Mr. Durrell's at Salt River. As the epitaph on his tombstone at Salt River tells us, there always seemed to be company at Mr. Durrell's table. Sometimes they were frivolous. After dinner, they oft all round take hold of the tablecloth, lift it up, and shake all the crumbs on a plate in the middle, a ready way Jamaica fashion. September 6th, 1751. And sometimes bawdy. Old Tom Williams says he pleases his mistress yet twice a night, first by putting his thigh over her, which pleases her by putting her in expectation. Next, he pleases her by taking it off when she is weary of the weight. July 17th, 1751. Life at Salt River was very different from life at Vineyard. At Vineyard, he had been the only white resident. Here, he was continuously in the company of whites. There, he had sought conversation of an evening he had found it was with the slaves. Here, he found it at the planter merchant house table. There, he had recorded what slaves had told and shown him, learning from them more than from any other the names and uses of unfamiliar things. Here, in the smarter set, under the candelabra, he heard the gossip of the whites. There is no suggestion that on leaving Mr. Vassall's employment, Thistlewood had any other prospect of a job. Indeed, during the following weeks at Salt River, where again he was a guest at Mr. Durrell's house and table, the review of possibilities was resumed. Captain LeBruce, the swashbuckling sailor and slave trader whom he found there, told him that he had made 3 voyages from Brazil to Guinea, about 25 days' sail from coast to coast, and that a common price for a slave at Pernambuco was £1 of gold, and that 4 pieces of 8 Spanish dollars, each worth 6 shillings 3 dittos, Jamaica currency, invested in Brazilian tobacco would fetch about 15 times that much in Guinea, dated the 10th of July, 1751. Thomas Durrell, the merchant, advised that cargoes of books be brought in yearly, chiefly history and poetry, all books of entertainment. The history of the devil goes off well. He had about £50 worth, which were soon all gone. Saddles, boots, and greatcoats too, he said, would do very well, but not to trust a bit of the money. Samuel Morediner, who did not really understand Thomas Thistlewood's ambition, or who was simply commenting without suggestion, remarked that shoe blacks and razor grinders were much needed and might make money. Mr. William Durrell suggested that great profit might be made selling Flanders laces, Hollands soaps, etc., if a person lived in or near Savannah-la-Mar. The possibilities of trade might have interested Thistlewood, who had some experience in that, but he does not say so. He spent his days walking, fishing, listening, writing in his journal, and writing letters to his brother, to Henry Hewitt, and to Alexis Emerson. These had all in some way been involved in his European trading enterprise, but in customary style. Thistlewood gives no hint about the content of his correspondence. On the same day on which he sent the letters off, the 24th of August, Mr. William Wallace, the surveyor, being at our house, proffered me £50 per annum for the first year to assist him and live as he lives, and £100 for the second year. No other comment, but we know that he refused. On Sunday, the 8th, he walked down with the barcadier, with Mr. Thomas Tomlinson, Jr., and Run leaped with him, beat him. He does not say so, but perhaps he was trying to emulate an Irishman in Hispaniola who, according to Captain de la Bruce, had leapt 22 feet at a single running leap upon a level. Nor were his other, often athletic proclivities entirely neglected. Tuesday, 10th of September, about 10:30 a.m., come Flora, a Congo super terrain among the canes, above the wall head, right hand of the river, toward the Negro ground. She's been for watercress, gave her 4 bits. And the next morning, in the very small hours, about 2 a.m., come Negro girl, superfloor, north at North Bedfoot, and in the East Parlor, unknown. He didn't even know this young lady's name. He just knew that he had to have her. On the same day, he was to experience a less manageable aspect of life on the plantations. All right, so Moana Haguziki says, I don't know what they was thinking, just let them right in. Exactly, what were they thinking? And he says, it's interesting. I wonder if the Black people treated the new Negroes of the plantation the way they treated Thistlewood. I wonder if they treated them as kindly as they treated Thistlewood as well. The forecast says that's the European mindset. They think they own everything or try to conquer it. Greetings, Anthony McPhail. How are you this evening? Thanks so much for tuning in. I know we're putting a late night, but we want to really get into this book. At about 6 a.m., the wind freshened. At noon, it was at gale force, with harsh gusts spraying the seawater like a mist. From 3 p.m. to sunset, the hurricane passed over, blew the shingles off the stables and boiling house, and all the thatch off the cooperage and trash house, burst open the great house windows that were secured by strong bars, blew the weather boards and ridge boards off the great house, etc. Every room full of water. The jasmine tree by the tombs blown down, and many of the orange trees out of the rows before the great house. All the pomegranates in the garden blown down, and everything tore to pieces, almost. Plantain trees, all presently down. About sunset, all the white people, except for vis-a-vis Mr. Durrell, Captain Reverie de la Bruce, Mr. Peter Fuchs, Mr. Samuel Mordenner, and myself, all leave the great house and shelter in the storehouse and hurricane house. Around 11 p.m., returned to the great house, went to bed. That is, I laid down. Except Mr. Fuchs, who was so timorous that he sat up all night, as the wind, though now much abated, blew hard all night with rain and lightning. At noon next day, Thistlewood went down to the Barcadier. Strange havoc there. Mr. Mordenner's house quite down. He was in charge of Mr. Durrell's Barcadier store. The new storehouse walls severely damaged. 2/3 of the stored timbers strewn along the shore and floating out at sea. The boards, staves, and shingles blown about as if they were feathers. Most of the new wharf washed away. Vast wrecks of seaweeds drove a long way upon the land. A heavy iron roller case carried a long way from where it lay and half buried in the sand. In Mr. Durrell's recollection, The sea had not raged so furiously in the hurricanes of 1722 and 1744. Thistlewood was amazed, excited, full of detail in recording this new terrifying experience. He walked along the seaside, a long way each side of the Barcadier, no birds stirring, many fish thrown up dead upon the shore, broke my penknife cutting a mangrove, and, breaking the quiet of the birds, he shot 2 snipe. Mr. Beckford's Barcadier was also in a state of strange havoc, said, and looking landwards. All the woods and mountains look open and bare, and very ragged. The woods appear like our woods in England in the fall of the leaf, when they are about half down. Dated September 13th, 1751. The news from Black River told of equal devastation there, stores damaged, and Mr. Bennett's place at Robarcadier quite floated, and his sloop, lately purchased, supposed to be lost. September 14th, 1751. Mr. Dorill's Egypt plantation, the overseer there, John Filton, and his Negro wife had taken shelter in the curing house cistern. Perhaps that was considered negligence. On Monday, the 16th of September, a little before dinner, walking in the plantation at Salt River, Mr. Dorill offered me if I would accept to be overseer of Egypt estate. He would give me 60 pounds per annum. I willingly accepted it. No time was lost. On the same day, about 2 p.m., I set out for Egypt on the horse Billy, guided by Salt River Quaco. Miss Anderson had given him some biscuits and a roll of chocolate, and had seen him fitted out with saddle and bridle. Got there about 4 ditto, went into the field, found 42 Negroes at work clearing the ground of hilltop of trash, Quaco and Morris mending the garden fence. John Filton did not come home past 8 at night. Gave him his discharge, wrote thus, Westmoreland, September 16th. I have this day discharged Mr. John Filton from my service. William Dorill. And another order wrote thus, Mr. John Filton, deliver up all the keys as also the estate and everything belonging to me, to the bearer, Mr. Thomas Thistlewood, who I hope will take better care of the estate than you have done. Yours, William Dorill, Salt River, September 16, 1751. Received the boiling house, curing house, and corn house keys. And that was that. Not a word of John Filton's reactions, nor of his own feelings at so sudden a move. But we can sense a note of triumph in the account. Thomas Thistlewood might have felt some compassion for John Filton, but even more likely, he was probably full of approval of a move which seemed clearly to recognize him as a superior competence. I told you he only does things to suit himself. In his own mind, there was no doubt at all that he had it. But Egypt was a sugar estate, not a cattle pen. And Mr. Dorill, friend and companion to the bright, engaging young adventurer from England, might take a rather different view of a bright, self confident, and independently minded overseer. On Wednesday, September the 18th, 1751, Thomas Thistlewood put himself in charge of Egypt. On that day, in the afternoon, I rode all over the plantation, and he had not come to Egypt. He would not have worked for Mr. Wallace the surveyor, nor would he have tried to set up as a merchant in Savannah Lamar, for at last he put down what he had in mind, saying, had I not come here, I should have gone to Hispaniola with Captain Rivery de la Bruce to have learnt to make indigo. Here at Egypt, he was to make his name as a sugar estate overseer, lay the foundations of his own proprietorship by the purchase of land and slaves, quarrel with his various employers, none of whom, however, seemed to wish to lose his service, harden in his attitude towards his slave laborers, and his many casual interferences apart. He would go from a passionate affair with one slave woman into a lasting match with another who would bear him a son and live with him until he died. Mm-mm-mm. So as you can see, there is quite an interesting dichotomy there with Mr. Thistlewood, and that is the end of chapter 1. At Camphorn Academy, she's the principal there now. Oh, you guys are talking amongst yourselves. So yes, Thistlewood was a trip. Thistlewood was a sexually preoccupied narcissist that was ubiquitously fascinated with the enslaved population that showed him tricks, things, and information that white people didn't show him. Thistlewood was an opportunistic bastard, and he was amoral. He had his own set of moral codes, but those don't necessarily get revealed in his writings. We just know that he refused a job. We just know that he refused a job that was a reasonably good paying job that he should have accepted. The forecast says this is an interesting book. This dude was a psychopath. Yes, he was. Greetings, Bawana Haguziki. How are you this evening?
I'm wonderful. How are you, my friend? How are you?
I'm good.
Good. That's so good. That's so good. First, let me say I appreciate you reading this book. The introductory is kind of wordy, but I think as you go along, you'll really get into Thistlewood's crimes. What's interesting
Yes.
is the fact that how first of all, let me see, Thistlewood came to Jamaica with a plan. He came to Jamaica with a plan, and everyone is if you really could stop to consider. Jamaica was they had a harsh plantation system going, like many of the Caribbean countries. Very harsh plantation system. But the fact that this guy, he just came there and he was so embraced. I'm like, yo, he's a white man. You don't know what he capable of. And the Negroes there was like, come on in. Let me get you one of my girls. He was popping bottles, drinking rum. I'm like, you would think that he would have been treated with a little bit or a degree of suspicion. And
Yeah.
I'm asking myself whether when new slaves came on plantations in Jamaica, I'm sure they was I'm sure they would have gotten or been looked at to a degree with a whole lot of suspicion by other slaves. In the same scenario right now, when Haitians come to the country, my country, or Jamaicans come or other people from the Caribbean places, they are treated initially with suspicion. But a white tourist could come here and do all kind of degenerate things, and he is embraced. No one questions him. I'm asking, where do we get that from? Where did we get that from? Was they primed initially and conditioned and told, listen, we have a new guy coming, white guy coming in here. You all treat him like how you all treat Big Daddy. you know, because I'm like, I don't know him. I don't know him. I'm gonna look at him in a with in a very suspicious way because I don't know what he's capable of. Because I've already seen what the other plantation slaves was doing in Jamaica, so I'm not gonna embrace him like he's my brother and shit like that. But it's just interesting how everyone was so welcoming. This new white man coming to the plantation, and they didn't know what he was capable of doing.
Yeah, I agree. That was very interesting. Now, there were some observations saying that Black people are naturally exonomous, which means we like things that are different from us. And so there's this almost preference for new and interesting things. But in that plantation environment, I can't square the circle of why they would tell this white man all their business, why they would turn over their women to him, why they would accept gifts and pop bottles from him, why they would do those different things with him when they were under these harsh plantation conditions, unless they had previously had a Black overseer. And so now this white overseer, because sometimes white plantation owners would do that, would set up a Black overseer over a Black population, treat them harshly, and put themselves in the role of savior.
Sure, sure, sure. And you know what? Speaking on black overseers, I think that that's not talked about enough because sometimes the black overseers were
Hmm.
worse. Just as you have these black overseers right now called prime ministers. They're
Hmm.
worse. They're worse on black people than some white folks, and that's a shame to say that, but it's true, matron. It's true. It's true.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It's true, and it's shameful. And we let these people run roughshod over us. You know, in the Caribbean, I'll say you guys have more of a political education than we have because you guys understand that a black face and a high space doesn't mean anything. It took us a while to learn that lesson, and we learned that lesson here in the Americas, in the United States, at a very high price. Anthony, it says your device is not connected, so as soon as your device connects, I'll let you on the stage.
Yeah,
Oh,
but I,
there
I
you.
really I really do appreciate you reading this because
I
someone needs to
appreciate
tell
you
you.
making the I appreciate you making the recommendation. And yes, someone needs to make the connections. We need to make the connections and tell the story of what actually happened.
Yes, yes, yes. And you read the first book in terms of the slavery system in the United States, and many people don't know what the slavery system really in the Caribbean was like. And I just
Mhm.
really wanted to give the listeners a peep into what it was like in as far as the slave system in the Caribbean, because many people don't really know that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we don't talk enough about the fact that the slave system in the United States was horrible, but in other countries, in other areas, in the Caribbean especially, it was deadly. They would send the bad slaves that they wanted to break to the Caribbean to be broken because the conditions there were so harsh. And that's all they ever really say about the conditions in the Caribbean. They don't talk about the sexual violence, the starvation techniques, the torture techniques, the torture techniques and things that the ways that they experimented on them, and the ways that they perfected horror and terror amongst Black people in the Caribbean. They just talk about what happened here in the United States in these
Sure,
little
sure,
13 colonies.
sure. Perfected. She say perfected, and that's crazy. How to break a slave? That's crazy. But like I said, I appreciate you. I let Anthony go, And I'll wait. So you finished the other book. I didn't see. I didn't hear the last one, but I guess you finished the other book. I'll go back and listen to the playback on the
Yeah,
last book you was reading. So but
yeah.
thank you again. Thank you again. Yes.
Well, you're very welcome. Hi, Anthony McPhail. How are you tonight?
Hey Mitchell, how you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you for
Doing well.
joining.
Peace to everybody in the chat, man. Peace to my brother Barner and Forecast and everybody in the chat who's listening. Hey, yeah, Matron, again, another great reading as usual. But I was just thinking, I was just listening at y'all just what y'all was just talking about. You know, the Caribbean islands, it's Jamaica and Barbados, particularly those two islands, they were the islands that were known as the seasoning islands. No,
Yeah.
yeah, they were the islands where it was the whole purpose was to break the slaves, especially Barbados. I mean, both of them really, but especially Barbados, and because I read a lot about Barbados, how this was the place where they broke the enslaved African man and woman and child, and they was mostly children, like 14, 15. This is where they broke them and then shipped them to other destinations, in other parts of the Caribbean or in Central and South America or North America. They were specifically for that. I mean, when they came there, they said this is going to be the place where we break them at. You know what I'm saying? Because a lot of the enslaved Africans who were brought to the United States was now America. A lot of them came from the Caribbean. I mean, some came from Africa, but a lot of them came. They were Africans who came here via the
By way of the
Caribbean,
Caribbean. Right.
via the Caribbean, especially like in the Carolinas and Virginia, places like that. Even in Louisiana, where I'm at. But the other thing that I wanted to say real quick is that what Bonner had just touched on about black overseers. You know what I'm saying? And a lot of the times, all over these colonies, especially in the British colonies, the overseers were black, and they were black on purpose. It was the whole divide and conquer thing. Not only was okay, we're gonna set a black man as an overseer over you, and we already know what we say today now, Matron. Black police showing out for the white cop. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? So they was always going to be worse. And then another thing we have to also factor in is that they came from different ethnic groups and nations in Africa. You know what I'm saying? So they would put like this group may a Khan group, and who the Khan group may have a major status on the plantation. He may a Khan man who had been a king or a prince in Africa or whatever. They'll give him a high elevated status over like Igbo people or Mende people or other groups. You know what I'm saying? They give to keep up the divide and conquer thing. The main thing because most of the time these enslaved Africans outnumber these people 9-1, 10-1.
Yeah.
And so in order to do that, they had to, had a division. We're gonna divide them by tribes, it's by ethnic groups and by other things, like you're saying, because like a lot of the overseers were. I mean, in Louisiana, we had a rebellion in 1811 called the German Coast Rebellion, where the leader of that rebellion was a Haitian man. He was Haitian and he was a slave driver. He was the overseer. He was the overseer on the plantation. For some, he was mixed race. His daddy was French, his mother was African. But he was the leader. He was a slave driver, and then also Toussaint Louverture in Haiti. He had been an overseer too.
Yeah.
Toussaint was an overseer, and a lot of them were overseers. What I'm saying, but yeah, that's a key important thing that Bonner touched on that we don't read a lot about, the black overseers. I ain't mean to go on too long, Major. Not knock off right there. And great
You
reading,
didn't
man.
go.
Great reading too.
Thank you. You didn't go too long. You never go too long. It's important that we understand this. Just like it's necessary for us to understand that not all Maroons are the Maroons that we think of. Some of the Maroons was turning in the enslaved people. They would get to them and think that they was free, and they would get turned right back over to them plantations. We need to understand that overseers were black, and that's where class comes into place, because they think that if they show out enough for these white people, that they will be accepted and they will escape the punishments that they're metering out to the rest of the black people. But that type of class division amongst us has never historically served us, and we have to get to the point where we understand that they will give one of us some trinkets but never invite us to their cookouts, to their tables, to their events, to their activities. We will never be invited into whiteness no matter what we do. Forecast says if a Black overseer makes them feel that way, why don't we have the same energy for white overseers? Because the white man was positioned as a reprieve, because all you know is that you're being tortured by this Black overseer. The white man might come around and give you 2 bits. The white man might come around and he might give you a piece of meat or a piece of fruit. The white man might come around and all they had was that experience with the white person. Now, they didn't forget about the white person that accepted them onto the ships, because a lot of times they had Black people going out there acting as the slave catchers for them, or turning them over to them, to the white people. So there's a lot of division that they continue to keep up between us to this very day by having Black people serve white supremacist narratives and ideologies that work against us.
And Major, can I say one other thing before I knock off?
Absolutely.
Okay. One revolution. What I was reading about this one incident. This one it was a revolution. It was a revolution that happened in South America where it was called the British Guyana then. No, the Guyana colony. The British Guyana colony. It was called the Berbice Revolution. And you've heard of it, Matron?
I've heard of it, yeah.
Yeah, the Berbice, and there was this brother named Kofi, who was the leader of the Berbice Revolution. He and a lot of other brothers and sisters. It was a massive, colony-wide, nationwide revolution where the Africans had organized. But one thing, here's the thing about it, and it comes to that divided loyalty thing, which you was just talking about. Being an overseer or being a part of, well, I'm not like you other Negroes, you know what I'm saying? Master gave me some favors and stuff. You know what I'm saying? Well, Kofi was one of those guys, and he was that guy. He was deeply Christian. He loved his masters, you know what I'm saying? Because his masters had did so much, they were benevolent masters, what they were called benevolent masters. You know what I'm saying? He was like a superintendent, what they called him a superintendent. He was basically, he was an overseer too. You know what I'm saying? But at a point in time in the when the revolution was finna get kicked off, you had the other young brothers and sisters who were the radicals who were like, no, man, because he basically wanted to say, look, listen, we want to fight for a compromise, they wanted small stuff like to shorten our work week and all kind of stuff like this. What Kofi didn't want it, but the other brothers wanted to fight. We want our total freedom. And in other words, say he didn't want his masters them get killed.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? He didn't want his masters them get killed. But
right.
eventually, they side kind of won over, and he reluctantly. I was reading about it, say how he reluctantly was a revolutionary. You know what I'm saying? I'm quite sure he wanted to be free, him and his family, and see his people free, but he had those divided loyalties. Well, anyway, it ended up when you got that divided loyalty, when you can't decide between your people and your freedom and your master, the revolution gonna be doomed, and it was doomed. They fought hard. But because of that. And and the youngsters, and they talk about how the youngsters was disappointed in his leadership. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on, man, you our leader, man. You the man we look up to. But I'm just saying, when we get divided, we get compromised by getting them little goodies and things, from master. You know what I'm saying? You got that divided loyalty, and you don't know where you stand. You know what I'm saying? And you're gonna eventually, your situation not gonna change. It's gonna be doomed to failure. I just want to throw that in, Matron.
Yeah. Class divisions and racial divisions make no sense amongst Black people because they treat us all the same, whether you a nigga in a Maserati or a Bentley or in a Honda or a Camry. They're going to treat you the same when you encounter different apparatuses of their administration, different institutions and apparatuses within their administration, whether it's the police, the judicial system, the legal system on any level. The system wants to incarcerate and annihilate you. And when we make a big deal out of class divisions, thinking that we are the special Negro, we make the biggest mistakes. And we have to get to the point where we don't see this white man as a friend. We see this white man, all of them, as our adversary, because they are, unfortunately, our adversary in every way and shape of the word, because as many of our scholars and leaders have said, you know, you may not be a openly racist white person, but if you are a white person, you benefit from racism. And once we acknowledge that, then we can begin to make some real changes in the way that our behaviors are towards these people. You know what I'm saying? Because when we say, oh, but he's one of the good whites, oh, he's a nice one, then we begin to make stupid mistakes because we give them reprieves and we say, well, he can stay, or well, we won't annihilate this one, we won't take out this family or that family. I think that was one of the travesties of the Haitian Revolution. And then, you know, to say that we are going to give any leeway to non-Black people is a mistake. It is a mistake. We have to get to the point where we embrace our own, recognizing that I have more in common with the impoverished Black man than I do with the white man who is not going to ever be my friend. I'm getting ready to sign off for the night. Did you guys have anything else you wanted to say? We finished all of section 1. And this book is going to be read in those longer sections. So y'all gonna have to rock with me, you know, because I want us to get this information. I want us to really absorb what's happening and what continues to happen. You know, I want to thank Bwana Haguziki for suggesting the book and for being here tonight. Anthony McPhail for gracing my panel with your presence. Sister Ra and the elders that listen with you, and the Forecast Radio for being here. I know that KW Don 7 is listening, Koku from the Bitter Medicine Podcast is listening, and so many others. I appreciate you. I value you, and I thank you for sharing your time with me. I will see you on Tuesday, where we will read chapter 2 of Immiserable Slavery. And remember, when you see a white person coming into your court, coming into your neighborhood, coming into your area, they have an agenda and usually some type of financial security behind them. I also want to say that I live in Michigan, and there was an incident today at a mosque, at a synagogue, where a Lebanese man ran into the synagogue, and he had a shotgun, and they took him out because he wanted to kill some Jewish people, because unfortunately they had killed some of his family members over there in Lebanon messing around with these war games. They are going to have more incidents like that happening, whether it's here in Michigan or in your locale, because they're trying to drum up additional support for the war. So they are activating people to do these things to drum up support for the war, because if they feel like Americans are under attack in America, then they're going to say, oh, we're going to change our minds about this unpopular war, and we're going to go around and support the president. Don't do it. Remember, as a Black person, we don't have a friend in this fight. We're watching two of our enemies take each other out. All right, guys, that's all I have to say. Thanks for tuning in. Peace, guys.